December 7th, 1941. 6:30 in the morning, Honolulu. The sky is pink and gold over Pearl Harbor, a perfect Hawaiian dawn. 22-year-old Cornelia Fort is already in the air. She's teaching a student pilot, takeoffs and landings, routine work in a little interstate cadet trainer. Coming in for another landing, she looks casually around and sees a military plane coming directly toward her.
She jerks the controls away from her student, jams the throttle wide open, pulls above the oncoming aircraft. It passes so close their celluloid windows rattle. She looks down to see what kind of plane it was. Red circles on the wings. The rising sun. She looks toward Pearl Harbor. Black smoke is billowing up from the harbor. Then she looks way up. Silver bombers riding in formation. Something detaches from an airplane, comes glistening down. Years later, she would write, "My heart turned convulsively when the bomb exploded in the middle of the harbor." She lands as fast as she can. Bullets spatter all around her as a Zero strafes the runway. 2 little yellow cubs from her flight school never come back, washed ashore weeks later on the windward side of the island, bullet-riddled.
Cornelia Fort was not supposed to be a pilot. She was a Nashville debutante, daughter of one of Tennessee's wealthiest families. Her father was a prominent surgeon who co-founded the National Life and Accident Insurance Company. She was supposed to attend parties, find a suitable husband, live the life scripted for wealthy Southern women. But Cornelia Fort had other plans. She learned to fly after college, became Nashville's first female flight instructor, the only one in Tennessee. She was 22 years old when she witnessed the attack that changed America, and she knew in that moment exactly what she would do with her life. "I knew I was going to join the Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron before the organization was a reality, before it had a name, before it was anything but a radical idea in the minds of a few men who believed that women could fly airplanes. But I never knew it so surely as I did in Honolulu on December 7th, 1941.
Your father's war created opportunities for people who were never supposed to have them. Consider Evelyn Sharp, born in 1919 in rural Nebraska, adopted as an infant, raised in the tiny town of Ord, population barely 2,000. Her father ran a cafe and rented rooms upstairs. When Evelyn was 16, a man named Jack Jefford opened a flying school in Ord. He rented a room from the Sharps, and when he couldn't pay his rent, he offered to teach young Evelyn how to fly instead. After 25 lessons, she soloed. By 18, she had her commercial pilot's license. By 20, she was one of only 10 women flight instructors in the entire United States. She had taught over 350 men to fly before she ever put on a uniform. Little Evelyn Sharp from Ord, Nebraska, population 2,000, flying circles around men who were twice her age and half as good. Or consider Hazel Ying Lee, born in Portland, Oregon in 1912, daughter of Chinese immigrants. At 19, she sat in on a friend's flying lesson. Within a year, she was a certified pilot, one of the first Chinese-American women ever to earn a license. She tried to join the Chinese Air Force when Japan invaded China in 1937. They turned her down because she was a woman. She came back to America, waited, worked, and when the call finally came, she was ready. These women were not supposed to fly military aircraft. They were not supposed to test dive bombers, ferry pursuit planes, tow targets for live anti-aircraft gunnery practice. They were not supposed to prove that women could handle anything America's factories could build. But in 1942, America was running out of pilots. Heavy losses overseas,
every trained man needed for combat. And stateside, thousands of aircraft sat waiting on factory tarmacs. Somebody had to deliver them. General Henry Hap Arnold was initially skeptical. He didn't believe women could fly military aircraft. But two women changed his mind. Jacqueline Cochran and Nancy Harkness Love, both already famous pilots, both persistent, both right. In September 1942, the Women Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron was born. 25 women, including Cornelia Fort. A year later, they merged with the Women Flying Training Detachment to form the Women Airforce Service Pilots, the WASPs. 1,074 women would eventually serve. They were the first women in history to fly American military aircraft. Your father knew they existed. He just wasn't supposed to remember them.
Sweetwater, Texas, Avenger Field. Sand and dust and relentless wind, 100-degree heat in summer, freezing in winter. This is where they trained them. 25,000 women applied. Only 1,800 were accepted for training. Of those, just over 1,000 graduated. The washout rate was brutal, higher than the men's programs, because they had to be better than the men just to be considered equal. Mary Anna Martin Weil rode home from Avenger Field in the spring of 1944. Gee, what a long day this has been. We've spent the entire afternoon marching here and there and in lengthy lectures. So far, I'm thrilled beyond measure. Another trainee, Madge Rutherford Minton, wrote to her parents. Well, little 6'3" Mr. Jones admitted yesterday in his Texas drawl that, baby, you're doing better, but there's a H of a lot room for a H of a lot more improvement. Last night, spring came to Texas. We had a real old-fashioned thunderstorm, which brought the first dampness here since last November. Everyone in the barracks was at the doors or windows. We were very excited about it all. They were young women, far from home, learning to fly warplanes in the middle of the desert. And they were having the time of their lives. When they graduated, they earned silver wings, Santiago blue uniforms designed by Bergdorf Goodman, made by Neiman Marcus. And then they went to work. They flew every aircraft America built, pursuit planes, P-51 Mustangs, P-47 Thunderbolts, P-38 Lightnings, bombers, B-17 Flying Fortresses, B-25 Mitchells, B-26 Marauders, B-29 Super Fortresses, trainers, transports, target tugs. 60 million miles, 12,650 aircraft delivered. More than half of all pursuit planes ferried during the war were delivered by women. And they did the jobs the men didn't want to do. In October 1943, male pilots were refusing to fly the B-26 Martin Marauder. They called it the Widowmaker, the coffin with wings. Its fatality rate was terrifying men out of the cockpit. General Arnold ordered Jacqueline Cochran to select 25 WASPs to fly it, to prove to the men it was safe. They did. The men flew again. They towed targets for live anti-aircraft gunnery practice. Your father's anti-aircraft gunners needed to learn to shoot, so WASPs flew over them, dragging target sleeves behind their aircraft. The gunners shot at the targets with live ammunition. Sometimes they missed the targets, hit the tow lines, hit the aircraft. Madeline Sullivan and Dorothy Hawkins were flying a B-24 when a gunnery crew shot out their engine. They made an emergency landing. Nobody apologized.
Cornelia Fort wrote about what this work meant to her.
I have yet to have a feeling which approaches in satisfaction that of having signed, sealed, and delivered an airplane for the United States Army. We have no hopes of replacing men pilots, but we can each release a man to combat, to faster ships, to overseas work. Delivering a trainer to Texas may be as important as delivering a bomber to Africa if you take the long view. I cannot put into words why I fly. It is something different for each of us. I know it in dignity and self-sufficiency and in the pride of skill. I know it in the satisfaction of usefulness.
March 21st, 1943. Cornelia Fort was flying a BT-13 Valiant in formation, ferrying it from Long Beach to Dallas. A male pilot, Frank Stemme Jr., was flying too close, approaching her, pulling back, showing off. On one of his close passes, his landing gear struck her left wing. She went into a dive. She never pulled out. Cornelia Fort was 24 years old, the first American female pilot to die on active military duty. Her gravestone reads, "Killed in the service of her country."
But the military didn't pay for her funeral. Her family did. Because Cornelia Fort wasn't a soldier. She was a civilian, a civil service employee. When a WASP died, the Army didn't ship her body home. Her family had to pay for that. The Army didn't provide a flag for her coffin. Her friends pooled their money to buy one. 38 WASPs died serving their country. 11 in accidents, 27 during missions. Every single one was buried at her family's expense.
November 23rd, 1944. Hazel Ying Lee was flying a P-63 King Cobra from Niagara Falls to Great Falls, Montana. Coming in for landing, another pilot was above her, also landing. Neither could see the other. Someone in the control tower saw them, yelled into the radio, "Pull up!" Hazel heard the order. She pulled up. The other pilot didn't hear. His radio was broken. The two planes collided in the air. Hazel was pulled from the burning wreckage, her flight jacket still smoldering. She died 2 days later from her burns. She was 32 years old. 3 days after that, her family received another telegram. Her brother Victor, serving with the Tank Corps in France, had been killed in action.
The Lee family prepared to bury 2 of their children. The cemetery in Portland told them no. Hazel and Victor couldn't be buried in the white section because they were Asian. War heroes. One gave her life flying for America. One died fighting in France. And a cemetery in America told their family their bodies weren't welcome. The Lee family fought back, won, buried their children side by side on a hillside overlooking the Willamette River. Hazel Ying Lee was the 38th and final WASP to die in service. Her Chinese name, Ying, means hero. She lived up to it.
By late 1944, General Arnold had changed his mind about women pilots. Completely. In a speech to the final graduating WASP class on December 7th, 3 years to the day after Pearl Harbor, he said, "Frankly, I didn't know in 1941 whether a slip of a young girl could fight the controls of a B-17. Now, in 1944, we can come to only one conclusion. The entire operation has been a success. It is on record that women can fly as well as men. You and more than 900 of your sisters have shown you can fly wingtip to wingtip with your brothers. I salute you. We of the Army Air Force are proud of you. We will never forget our debt to you. 13 days later, on December 20th, 1944, the WASPs were disbanded. Sent home. Forgotten.
Here is what happened to the Women Air Force Service Pilots after the war. Their records were sealed, classified, locked away in government archives for 33 years. They received no veterans benefits, no GI Bill, no medical care, no recognition. When they died in service, the military wouldn't even let them put a flag on the coffin. They were sent home at their own expense. No tickets, no buses, no trains arranged. You served your country flying bombers and pursuit planes for 2 years? Walk home.
The reason? They were never officially military. Civil service employees. Civilians in uniform. The bill to give them military status had failed in Congress in 1944 by 19 votes. Male pilots, worried about losing their jobs after the war, had lobbied against it. Newspapers implied that unqualified women were taking jobs from deserving men. Congress listened to the men. And so, 1,074 women who had flown 60 million miles, who had delivered more than half of America's pursuit planes, who had towed targets while men shot at them with live ammunition, who had proven that women could fly any aircraft America could build, were erased.
Your father came home from the war to parades and grateful crowds. The WASPs came home to nothing. Commercial airlines wouldn't hire them, told them the public wouldn't accept women pilots. They put away their wings, raised families, took jobs as teachers and nurses and secretaries. They kept quiet. For 30 years, most of them never talked about what they had done. Because nobody wanted to hear it. Because the history books didn't include them. Because the government had decided they didn't exist.
1977. The United States Air Force announced it was accepting women into pilot training for the first time. They called it historic. First women ever to fly military aircraft for the United States. The surviving WASPs heard this, and they had had enough. Led by B. Falkhadu, they organized, lobbied, testified before Congress. Colonel Bruce Arnold, son of General Hap Arnold, joined their cause. To fulfill his father's wishes, to give these women what they had earned. Senator Barry Goldwater, himself a WW2 ferry pilot, sponsored legislation. The bill became the only piece of legislation in history to be co-sponsored by every woman member of Congress. On November 23, 1977, 33 years after they were sent home, President Jimmy Carter signed Public Law 95-202. The Women Air Force Service Pilots were finally granted veteran status. They were not invited to the signing ceremony. Their medals arrived years later, in plain brown envelopes, through the mail. In 2009, President Barack Obama signed a bill awarding the WASPs the Congressional Gold Medal. The surviving women, by then in their 80s and 90s, came to Washington to receive it. Lieutenant Colonel Nicole Malachowski, the first female pilot in the Air Force Thunderbirds demonstration squadron, spoke at the ceremony. If you spend any time at all talking to these wonderful women,
you'll notice how humble and gracious and selfless they all are. Their motives for wanting to fly airplanes all those years ago weren't for fame or glory or recognition. They had a passion to take their gifts and use them to help defend not only America, but the entire free world from tyranny. And they let no one get in their way.
Your father came home from the war, and somewhere, in some factory or airfield, a woman had ferried the plane he flew. A woman had test-flown the bomber before he climbed aboard. A woman had delivered the fighter that protected him on his mission. A woman had towed targets so his anti-aircraft crews would know how to shoot straight. He knew this. He saw them. And then he was told to forget. The B-17 your father flew to Germany? A woman might have delivered it to his airfield. The P-51 that escorted him home? A woman flew it off the factory floor. They proved they could fly anything, and then America pretended they never existed.
This story survives because they wrote it down. Cornelia Fort wrote about seeing Pearl Harbor burn, about what it meant to deliver an airplane for her country, about knowing, finally, what she was meant to do. Madge Minton wrote home about dust storms and thunderstorms and Texas instructors who said, "Baby, you're doing better." Mariana Weil wrote about soloing for the first time, about B-17s landing to take the graduating class to a dance. Hazel Ying Lee introduced her fellow pilots to Chinese cooking, wrote their nicknames in Chinese characters in lipstick on their airplanes. 38 of them gave their lives. They flew into mountains and crashed on runways and burned in wreckage. They died training, ferrying, proving that women belonged in the sky. And for 33 years, America pretended it never happened. Cornelia Fort once wrote about what it meant to march in formation for the first time, to wear the uniform she had earned, to be part of something larger. For all the girls in the WASPs, I think the most concrete moment of happiness came at our first review. Suddenly, and for the first time, we felt a part of something larger. Because of our uniforms, which we had earned, we were marching with the men. And then a bomber took off. 4 fighters escorted it part of the way overseas. As they circled over us, I could hardly see them for the tears in my eyes. As long as our planes fly overhead, the skies of America are free, and that's what all of us, everywhere, are fighting for. And that we, in a very small way, are being allowed to help keep that sky free is the most beautiful thing I have ever known. She died 6 months later, March 21st, 1943, 24 years old. I am grateful that my one talent, flying, was useful to my country.
Your father's generation is leaving us. So are the women who flew beside them. Most of the WASPs are gone now. The youngest survivors are in their late 90s. They waited 33 years for recognition, 65 years for a medal. They never asked for glory, only to be remembered. Now you know. The women who flew America's warplanes. The women who proved that girls could fight the controls of a B-17. The women who were erased from history and refused to stay forgotten. This is the story your mother never told you, because she wasn't supposed to remember. But the WASPs wrote it down, and now their voices survive. 1,074 women, 60 million miles, 38 lives. Finally remembered.